I'm sure that your students would love to ask many, many questions. So before they start questions, I think it's very important just to say that Dr. Thomas has been to space 4 times, and that makes him incredibly qualified to talk about space and being an astronaut. But he also happened to be a very nice person. So when you combine that with the fact that he's an experienced astronaut, it means he really is a cool person to talk to. And I mean, I know all the answers to most of his questions because we've spent a lot of time together. We're going to spend some more time in September, but I know that you guys are going to be very interested in asking him questions. So I'm going to hand over to you, and you guys can ask some questions.
That's great. Steve, can I tell him quickly about my background?
Yes, do that.
Let me just take 2 minutes and tell him a little bit about myself. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Don Thomas, and as you heard, I had the amazing opportunity to fly on 4 space shuttle missions. I was on Space Shuttle Columbia 3 times and Discovery once. I've spent 44 days up in space, and during that time, I went around the Earth 692 times. My background is in science and engineering. I got a bachelor's degree in physics, one of the sciences, and then my master's and doctorate from Cornell University in engineering. And then I worked at Bell Labs in Princeton, New Jersey for a few years, and joined NASA in 1988 and was an astronaut for 17 years. So that's just a little bit about my background.
That's great. I went to Cornell too, actually. Funny.
Great. I was there from, I think a lot earlier than you were there. I was there from 77 to 82.
77. So I just missed you by a few years, I guess. But yeah, we had our, I think there's a reunion coming up, but I'll get into that later.
Okay.
All right. So that's a good background. Okay, so can we ask some questions?
It's all yours. Go for it.
All right. Let's start with Isabel. Go ahead.
What do you eat when you're in space?
Okay, good question, Isabel. Because we don't have a refrigerator or freezer or anything like that up in space, most of the food that we fly is freeze-dried food. And it's very similar to instant oatmeal you may have at home where you just add hot water, mix it up, and it's ready to eat. So I have a package of food here. This is the type of food that we fly. This is cream spinach. Can I have everybody raise their hands if you love cream spinach?
Oh, let's see. I'm going to get a photograph of that.
I didn't see a single hand go up.
Oh, look, I got a couple of hands.
You got a few? Okay. Well, our food comes in, packages like this, and it's freeze-dried. So when it comes time to make a meal, we bring this package to a food station. There's a sharp needle that'll puncture into the end of it here. We can inject hot water in there, and that dry, hard food will absorb that water, soften up, and after a few minutes, it's ready to eat. We just cut this open with a pair of scissors, and we eat it with a normal fork or spoon right out of that little plastic container. Now, all the food has a little blue dot of Velcro on it. You could probably see maybe 3 of those little blue dots on there. And after we make our meal, typically the astronauts will just kind of Velcro it to themselves, and then you can float to a window and you watch the Earth go by and you have your lunch or dinner stuck to you right there. Very convenient. We don't use a dinner plate because what do you think would happen in space?
What would happen?
Float away. So we stick it to ourselves. We can stick it on the wall. And we've got freeze-dried hamburgers. We've got macaroni and cheese, spaghetti and meat sauce, green beans, maybe 200 to 300 different food items that we can select from in space. And the food is okay. I never say it's delicious. And I always say I would never go to a restaurant that serves space food. So don't go to space for the food, but go there for the experience.
Words to live by. Kamaya.
What was the longest time you have been in space?
Okay, Maya, my longest mission was 16 days. And my first flight, this was back in 1994, so it was like 24 years ago. My first flight was 15 days. And at that time, it was the 4th longest U.S. space mission ever. Now, today, we have astronauts up on the International Space Station. They routinely spend 6 to 12 months up there. So I've long lost that record, to be the 4th longest. I'm probably the 50th or 100th longest U.S. space mission at this point. but my longest one was 16 days. And 21, 22 years ago, that was a long mission at that time.
Okay, Maddie. What's your question?
Do you ever get lonely? If yes, what do you do that cheers you up?
You know, in space, we were in a very small area. So on the space shuttle, we had typically 7 astronauts on the crew. And the total volume, the total area for the astronauts is a fairly small area, maybe the size of your kitchen at home. So somebody is always bumping into you. You know, it's hard to get away from everybody. So from that point of view, you know, you don't feel lonely. But I did feel like lonely from my family. I felt totally detached from planet Earth. Even though we were orbiting 200 miles above the Earth, and we would pass over Houston, Texas, and that's where I lived at the time. I could look out the window and see Houston, the city of Houston down below, but I felt like I was a million miles away. Just because you couldn't reach out and touch anybody, it was difficult to talk to anybody or communicate back then. So it got a little lonely up there for your family. But I took some pictures along of my family, and I would Velcro them around my sleep area, and wherever I was working, I would have a picture of my wife and my son as I moved around the shuttle. So that helped a little bit. And then once during the mission, we could talk, you know, to one another. So I could call my wife and talk to her, you know, in mission control.
Interesting answer. Morgan.
How long does it take to get to space in a rocket?
Okay, I'm going to throw that one back to you. How long do you think it would take to get to space, all the way to space? We launched from the Kennedy Space Center. How long do you think? Want to get a couple guesses, and I'll tell you if it's.
All right, what do you think?
2 days.
2 days. It's less than 2 days.
Chloe?
1 day.
It's less than 1 day.
Star?
A few hours.
200 miles above the Earth. How long does it take to get there?
It's 200 miles. So think about it. 200 miles isn't that far when we're flat, right?
I heard 2 hours, and it's a little less than that. We'll take one more guess, and then I'm going to tell you the answer.
Yoko.
2 hours.
2 hours. It only takes 8.5 minutes to get to space.
What?
I'll just bet it takes you longer than that to get into Manhattan from where you live.
It takes forever to get to traffic.
So that was always amazing to me that it only took 8.5 minutes to get up there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Can you believe that? Fascinating. Okay, here's another question. Why don't you wave and say who your name so we can see.
I'm Daniela, and why do you need that big suit when you go out to space?
Okay, we wear different suits. We wear orange ones when we launch and when we come back down and land. In those suits, we call them launch and entry suits. So we wear them just for the launch and landing. And they protect us in case we lose our cabin pressure, if our oxygen starts leaking out, or if there's smoke, if we have a fire inside the spacecraft, then the spacesuit will protect us from that. We can close our visor, turn on our own oxygen, and breathe clean air until we can put the fire out or take care of the leak. When we're going to go outside to do a spacewalk, we call it, so you're going to leave the space shuttle or leave the space station and go outside and maybe repair a satellite or do some work on the space station, we wear a spacesuit. They're typically white. They weigh about 300 pounds, and you have to have a spacesuit when you go outside because there is no air in space. It's a total vacuum there. So if you would go outside without a spacesuit, all the air would get sucked out of your lungs, and you couldn't breathe in. You couldn't get a breath of air at all. So the spacesuits protect us from that. It provides oxygen for us. And also in space, as you're doing a spacewalk, you're going around the Earth, it's either very hot outside or very cold. In the sunlight in space, it's about 250 degrees Fahrenheit. At nighttime, when the sun goes down, the temperature drops to minus 200. So we go around the Earth every hour and a half. You get 45 minutes when it's super hot, 45 minutes when it's super cold. And if you're out there doing a spacewalk, that spacesuit has to protect you from those hot temperatures and cold temperatures. So the spacesuit does a lot of things just to protect the astronaut, to keep us comfortable, healthy, and alive as we're working out in that tough environment.
What's the weather?
May even say who you are so you can see who's talking. Okay, good.
My name is Jordana. What's the weather in space?
Okay, that's a very easy one. There is no weather. Okay, we are up above the atmosphere of the Earth, so there is no weather. There's no rain, there's no snow. We get 45 minutes of sunlight, 45 minutes of nighttime. And so we don't have to deal with weather up there. We on many of my missions, I passed over huge hurricanes. But again, we're flying 200 miles up. The very top of the hurricane, clouds, they're probably maybe 8 miles up or so, at the 8 or 9 miles up. So we're well above any of the storms that you'd see down here on Earth.
Do you see her face? It's quite a reaction.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that there's no weather up there, but there's no air, there's no water, nothing like that.
Now, before any more questions come from Mrs. R's class, I sort of find out if Mr. McNulty, if any of your students want to ask a question.
I'm asking them right now. Let's see who has. Come on up if you got your first question. Go ahead and tell us your name. Here's our microphone.
And Mr. McNulty, we did this a year or so ago. It's good to see you again.
Oops, hold on, we got someone muted. No? I'm not sure if we're hearing any sound coming from Mr. McNulty.
I was, and then he dropped out.
No, we're not hearing any sound from Mr. McNulty. There we go. Now we can hear you. Okay.
All right, good. Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name's Ethan, and I was wondering, what was the scariest part of your job going to space?
Hi, Ethan. It's great to meet you guys. The scariest part for me was always the launch. And it only takes 8.5 minutes to get to space, so it doesn't take long, but it's the most hazardous part of the mission because we're sitting on 500,000 gallons of explosive rocket fuel. There's a lot of shaking and vibration going on. A lot of high-speed pumps are pumping all that fuel to our engines. So I think the highest probability of something going wrong, having an accident, is during the launch phase. So I always thought that was the scariest. And I always tell people I was like 10% scared out of my mind during launch and 90% just excited. And I compare it to going on one of the great roller coasters at our theme parks. If you've ever been on one of the scary roller coaster, the bar comes down, you're strapped in. And as you head up that first hill, you may be a little bit scared, but you're very excited about what you're doing. And that's the way I felt on launch morning.
Cool. Okay. We do another question from Mr. McNulty, and then we'll go back to Amy's group.
Yes, we have another question. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Your camera's right up there.
Hi, I'm Brittany.
Hi, Brittany.
I was wondering how safe it is to go for the launch.
Yeah, how safe is the launch? Well, we flew 135 space shuttle missions over a period of about 30 years. And 2 of those had bad accidents where the space shuttles blew up. One of them, Space Shuttle Challenger, blew up in 1986, just a minute and a half into the launch. And then in 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia came apart during the landing as it was re-entering the atmosphere. And on both of those missions, we lost the vehicles. The space shuttles got destroyed, and all 7 astronauts on each of those, missions, they died. So we had 2 bad accidents out of 135 missions. So if you do the numbers on that, it's like, 1 out of 65 or, 1 out of 70 or so is a chance that you may not make it back to Earth. So you're probably going to have a good mission. That's the way I always thought about it. But you always knew in the back of your head that this is a little bit dangerous and that something bad could happen on any day for any mission at any time. But you try not to think about it too much. I was committed to the exploration. I wanted to go to space. I wanted to, do science up in space and see the Earth from up there. So I knew what the risk was, and I was willing to take that. We take risks every day. We ride in cars, we ride on airplanes, we take trains, and every now and then there's an accident, a train accident, a plane, or a car crash. So we take risks like that. The shuttle risk was a little bit higher, for sure. but it still wasn't so much that it made me not want to do that at all.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Brittany.
All right. So we'll switch to Amy's class. You could just unmute yourself.
Can you hear us now?
There we go. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Ava?
When do you next go into space? And are you excited?
Okay, Ava, I retired from the astronaut program 11 years ago. So I no longer work at NASA, and I'm no longer an active astronaut. So I call myself a retired astronaut or a former astronaut. For me to go back into space again, I would probably have to win the lottery and win a lot of money that I could, buy a commercial ride to space. Right now, the Russians charge like $65 million to send tourists up to the space station for a week. The price will be coming down, but it's still in the $1 million, couple $100,000 for some of these commercial flights. So you'll be hearing a lot about these just in the next 5 or 10 years or so. But I probably won't be going up to space again. I would love to go up there again. I'd love to see more of the Earth, but it's probably not going to happen in my lifetime.
But the reality is that maybe one of them sitting in that classroom could be the next astronaut that maybe even goes to visit Mars.
Yeah, you are all the right generation. All of our students online here today, we call you the Mars generation because NASA's building a new rocket today called the Space Launch System. This is the biggest, most powerful rocket ever made, and it'll have the capability to send astronauts to the moon and onto Mars. So we won't be launching astronauts to Mars for about 20 to 25 years from now. 20 years from now, I'm going to be 83, way too old to go to Mars. But 20 years from now, you'll be close to 30 years old, most of you. And that's the perfect age to be those astronauts heading to Mars. So again, we need you working hard in school, especially in your math and science and any engineering classes that you take. We need to be ready for these missions because we're building these rockets and we're going to be ready for them. And we need you to help us on those flights.
Are there any students that are planning to become an astronaut?
Raise your hand if you want to become an astronaut, or maybe you think you might. All right, we have about 5 or 6, 7. We're getting more and more.
Excellent.
And Mr.
Excellent.
McNulty, how many in your class? Any takers to become an astronaut?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Any takers to become an astronaut in your class?
Oh, volunteers. Who wants to do it?
Raise your hand now.
Who wants to go? I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's some volunteers.
Okay, that's
that
great.
Sounds awesome. But now I noticed that Mr. Carnasak out in Chicago, he's got a question that he wanted to ask. So you want to unmute yourself and you can ask us?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm David Carnasak from Chicago. I teach 5th grade. And my question is for the astronaut. I've heard about astronauts that believe in UFOs. Did you or any other astronauts while you were in outer space ever feel like you saw a UFO?
Okay, David, this is a tough question. And Steve, are we recording this?
We are, but
You don't have to answer that.
I can make it private afterwards.
I'm gonna tell you this story, David. Okay, everybody has to promise me it doesn't leave this little network here. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, David, on my first mission, I'm looking out the window of the shuttle. First day in space. The sky is pitch black, and I'm looking out the window, and I noticed a light flashing out there, and it flashes once a second. It goes flash, flash, flash. So it catches my attention, and I'm watching this object, and I notice that it's moving with the space shuttle. I can see city lights down below. It's nothing like that. This thing was moving with us and flashing. So my first thought was, how lucky am I that here I am on my first mission, my first day in space, I'm making contact with the aliens. And I watched this object for about 10 minutes, and I finally realized what I was looking at. And what it turned out to be was a chunk of ice that had come off the rear end near the engines of the space shuttle. And this piece of ice was flipping in the air, just flipping end over end. And it had a flat side to it. And when the sunlight hit it, it would give you that flash. So what I thought was an alien, it turned out to be a chunk of ice. Now, if I had quit looking at that 5 minutes earlier, I would be sitting here today telling you, oh yeah, I saw something. It signaled me. Then the sun came up and it disappeared. I never saw it again. So the point is, we see strange things sometimes in space. And most of the time, if you study them, you can usually figure out what you're looking at. So we do see some funny lights, but typically, it's chunks of maybe a satellite out there, could be pieces of ice or other debris that's in space. I don't know anybody. I've never met one of the astronauts, and certainly not on my missions, that anybody saw any spacecraft, any aliens, nothing like that. Now, having said that, I do believe there's other life in the universe. There are just, so many galaxies, and each galaxy has billions and billions of stars, and we think each star has multiple planets. And there are just so many opportunities for life to be out there that I do believe that there's other life, but I don't think anybody has seen it yet. At best, we've seen some flashing lights.
That's a great question. Okay, so now we'll go back to Amy's group.
Okay, can you hear us?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, Sean, what's your question?
Hi, I'm Sean. What was the private interest?
The what?
The private interest.
What do you mean?
He said when they retire on the website, he said when he retired, he would do some private interest.
Okay, let's try another one. How about Luke?
How do you sleep in space?
Okay, Luke, that's a good question. The inside of the shuttle, as I told you, is fairly small, like the size of your kitchen at home, and we didn't have dedicated bedrooms. So when it was time to go to bed, we would just take a sleeping bag and attach it to some clips to the wall of the space shuttle. So typically you'd see the wall, and we'd have two, like a double-decker, one sleeping bag on the bottom of the wall and one up higher. If you wanted to, you could sleep up on the ceiling, and most astronauts will sleep up on the ceiling at least one night, so they come back to Earth and tell their friends, one night I slept up on the ceiling, and you're telling the truth. So you just float up to your sleeping bag, you slip into it, you zip it up, and you go to bed. So it's fairly easy and very comfortable in space. But it does feel very strange. That first time you climb on the wall and you're trying to go to sleep, that first day in space, it just doesn't seem right because you're so used to laying on the floor, laying on the bed, something like that.
Yeah, that seems tough to get used to. Okay, Sean has a different question.
That's
okay, Sean.
Okay.
What was your biggest discovery of being an astronaut?
Good question.
Boy, my biggest discovery. Well, I worked on, during my 4 missions, maybe, 300 different science experiments up there. And they weren't my experiments. I was doing them, performing them for other scientists from across the United States and around the world. But we had a lot of fun with those. We had one small tank that had baby jellyfish in it. And jellyfish kind of squirt as they swim through the water. You've probably seen them swim there around New York. But what baby jellyfish will do, they'll squirt to the top of their tank. They open their mouth, and with their mouth wide open in gravity, they fall and they feed. So they squirt to the top, open their mouth, and feed. Squirt to the top, open their mouth, and feed. In space, they would squirt to the top, open their mouth, and nothing would happen. Without gravity, they're not falling. Their mouth's open, but there's no food coming in. So they had to learn new swimming behaviors just so that they could eat in space. So some of those discoveries, just to see how some of these small animals, adapt to zero gravity and grow up there, was just a lot of fun. And I think it helped our scientists understand how other creatures adapt in space.
I'm curious to ask one little question. Going back to the sleeping, if someone snores, it's often because the soft tissues, because of gravity, are now collapsing. So if there's no gravity, does that mean no one snores in space?
I've heard people snoring in space.
Okay, there goes that theory.
That is a fact. Okay, I don't know what causes snoring, but astronauts snore.
Okay. All right. Anyone else got some questions?
Yeah, we have one. Yoko, what's your question?
What does the Earth look like?
Yoko, the Earth is so beautiful from space, and You know, we've taken images. You can go on YouTube and get some, you know, videos of the Earth. But from 200 miles up, when you look out the window, it's somewhat similar to looking out the window of an airplane. Except in an airplane, maybe you're, you know, 4 or 5 miles above the Earth, and we're 200 miles up. So as you fly out of New York City, LaGuardia, or JFK, and one of the planes there, you know, you can see the whole city of New York maybe out the window. In space, because we're a lot higher, we can see a few states and even a few countries in any one moment. So when you look back at Earth, the first time I looked out the window, I just gasped. I went, oh, wow, it's just so beautiful to see. And one thing that jumps out at you is the pitch black sky. The sky is a darker black than any color I've ever seen before. And coming right up against the limb of the Earth is a very thin glowing blue layer, and that's our atmosphere. And it looks paper thin from space. So when you look back at the Earth from space, you don't see this infinite atmosphere like it seems, you know, for us down here on Earth. You know, you see a paper thin layer of air protecting us around our planet. But the Earth is so spectacular. I've seen the top of Mount Everest about 25 times during my missions with my own eyes. I've seen the Great Barrier Reef. I've seen Mount Kilimanjaro. I've seen Cape Town, where Mr. Sherman is right now. I've seen that many times from space. You know, it's just beautiful to see all these incredible places around planet Earth.
Is it, and I know Joe's got a question over there, but before he asks it, you've seen Cape Town from space and you've been to Cape Town. Which is better, to see it from space or to actually be there?
You know, as beautiful as Cape Town is from space, and I will say this about any place on planet Earth, it is so beautiful to see it from space. But when you go to that location in person and you meet the people and you learn about the culture, how, you know, what they do differently or the same there, and you taste the food, and it's just a much better experience. So as much as I've loved looking at our planet from space, I really enjoy visiting down on Earth, where I can interact with the people, the students, and enjoy the food, things like that. So I think I would take it's more beautiful in person.
Good answer, good answer. Okay, so Mr. McNulty, you've got someone that wants to ask a question.
Well, it's good to hear an endorsement for Cape Town. This class, our project, we're working on a trip to Cape Town for this group.
Yes.
So it's a group project underway with that exact topic. But
awesome.
Here's our next question. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jack Morgan, and my question is, what kind of medical testing did you have to go through to be physically and mentally fit to go up into space?
Okay, that's a great question. You know, to become an astronaut, you go, if they select you, like out of the thousands of people that apply, NASA will select 100 individuals, and they bring them to the Johnson Space Center down in Houston, Texas for 1 week. And most of that week, you're down there doing a very thorough medical exam. So they're checking our blood, they're checking our heart, our brain waves, they're looking at your teeth, your hearing, just everything. They do medical testing the whole week on you, because they want to hire the healthiest people they can find, in the hopes that if we, you know, fly healthy people to space, they'll stay healthy up there. You know, if somebody gets sick in space, or if there's a problem, we're not anywhere near a hospital. So that's a problem for us up there. So the idea is to pick healthy people. So we did all kind of tests. We would run on treadmills, and they would measure our heart, you know, and stress us out and see how, you know, your heart did, you know, when you were working very hard running on a treadmill. Like I said, they took blood samples. They were just poking and prodding everything. And we also talked to psychologists and psychiatrists. They're asking you questions about why you want to go into space. So they're trying to get inside your head a little bit and look at your motivation.
Did they try trick questions like, do you believe in aliens? And then you like sit there and think, oh, is that a good question to answer?
They did some trick questions. One of the psychiatrists, I'm sitting in this overstuffed chair, very comfortable, and he was asking a series of very tough, complicated questions, you know, describing scenario A, scenario B, scenario C. And after the 5-minute description, he would ask you a question about them. So you really had to concentrate on that. And then at one point, he just threw in the question, what do you like to watch on television? And I said, I blurted out something about some cartoon show. And I knew that was the wrong answer, that I should have said, well, I like the History Channel, I like Discovery Channel. But because I was so relaxed there and had just finished up these really complex questions, he threw in this simple one, and he caught me off guard. So every now and then there's a trick question.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, we're back to Mrs. R's class. Any questions?
Okay. How about Chloe? What's your question?
Is it hard being away from your family?
It's a little hard to be away from your family. I think every astronaut misses their family, and you cannot wait to come back to Earth just so you can see them again. So yeah, you miss them. Today up on the International Space Station, as I told you, our astronauts up there for 6 months to 12 months at a time. And up on the space station today, we have like an internet Skype type telephone. So the astronauts can call home to their families just about every night. You can call anybody around the planet pretty much 24 hours a day. So they could see one another and talk every night. And that has been a great assistance, a great help for our astronauts in space, so they don't feel quite as lonely being up there.
Wow.
Well, I can say that we do have a plan to maybe do a Google Hangout with the International Space Station. And we will let you know when that is going to happen, because then maybe we're going to get some astronauts to do some experiments while they're actually in space, which I think will be quite exciting.
Wow. That's the next best thing to be in there.
There you go.
Wow, that would be amazing.
So any other questions? I'm sure you've got some tough questions to ask.
Anybody else? Avery, what's your question?
What was your favorite trip into space?
Okay, you know, I think for all the astronauts, their first mission is the most memorable one, because it's the first time you launch, the first time you see a sunrise from space, the first time when you're really floating in zero gravity. But my favorite mission would be my second mission. And what made that one my favorite was that 1 week before our scheduled launch aboard Space Shuttle Discovery, a woodpecker attacked the space shuttle.
Oh,
And our big orange fuel tank, you'll see pictures, or I got a model of one right here. But our big orange fuel tank for the shuttle is made out of aluminium, and it's covered with a few inches or centimeters of foam insulation, like you may have in your attic or in garage at home. And what the woodpecker did, he came in there, he was trying to make a nest. He would start drilling into that soft foam insulation. After 3 or 4 inches, he would hit the aluminum tank, couldn't go any further. He would move over and make another hole, and then another hole and another hole. And this one woodpecker ended up making 205 holes in our fuel tank. It delayed our mission 1 month. We became known as the Woodpecker Crew. So sadly, this is how I'm famous in life. I'm a member of the Woodpecker Crew. But we had a lot of fun. There were a lot of woodpecker jokes during the mission. On the first day, once we got to orbit, we opened up one of the drawers, one of the lockers in space, and a little stuffed Woody Woodpecker came floating out. And there you see the woodpecker, a still picture from a video clip there of him attacking the fuel tank. So because of all the woodpecker jokes, that's my favorite mission.
That's so funny. Who hasn't had a chance yet? Let's give somebody else a chance. Okay, Elise.
Hi, in training, I'm Elise, and in training, what do you do?
Okay, Elise, good question. You know, we train for our missions for many, many years. When I got selected to be an astronaut, I was training full time, you know, every day, Monday through Friday, for 4 years. So there's a lot of training involved. We spend a lot of our time in classrooms, just like you do, learning the different systems, you know, of the space station or the space shuttle. We spend some of our time underwater practicing to do spacewalks. We spend time in jets flying across the country, and we can do loops and all kind of maneuvers to get high gravity levels on us. We also spend time in simulators. These are models of the space shuttle. And we would practice launches and landings and practice what we're doing in space. So every single portion of the mission, we would train on how we're going to do it once we get to space. And the whole idea there is if you train and train and train, and you're very familiar with everything down here on Earth, when you get up to space, it'll be second nature to you. You'll be very comfortable up there, and there'll be no surprises for you. Does it sound like fun?
Oh. Can we ask one more question?
Yes, sure.
Lucas, can you wave?
Hi, I'm Lucas. How many people have went to space?
Lucas, the number is somewhere around 565 or so, plus or minus 5 people. So this is since 1961. On April 12th, 1961, Yuri Gagarin, he was the first human in space from the Soviet Union. A few weeks later, the first American went into space. So since 1961, we've had 565 roughly astronauts go into space from all different countries around the planet. Even had a South African go up, Mark Shuttleworth, a few years ago.
I'm just curious, how far is Florida from New York?
Who can explain how far it is from New York all the way to Florida? Is about how many? You know how many miles, Jack?
Like
Avery?
1,000?
1,000? Is it?
We'd have to look it up exactly.
I think 1,000's pretty good, 1,000 to 1,200. But I think I could put it in terms that Mr. Sherman will understand here. To get from New York to Florida, it would take about maybe a minute in the space shuttle.
Well,
it's an easy trip. It's an easy trip.
Well, I'll tell you why I ask, because on the 27th of June, you might be aware, or I think it's the 27th or the 28th, there will be a rocket. SpaceX are launching a rocket from Cape Canaveral. And while I'm supposed to be in Chicago, Mr. K, I might be thinking about sneaking out for a morning to fly to Florida just for the launch. And I was wondering, how far is it from New York to Florida if I was going to fly there?
Maybe 2.5 hours or so, huh?
Yeah, it takes 4 hours. It takes 2 hours.
So is it worth going to see a rocket launch? I mean, you've been in the rocket, but have you seen any launches yourself?
I've seen many, many launches myself, and I still, when I'm down at the Kennedy Space Center, I go down there a few times a year, and when there's a rocket launch, I always get up in the middle of the night or try to go out and watch it. It's still very exciting for me to see a rocket going up.
So are you telling me that maybe it's worth sneaking out just for that launch?
It's worth sneaking out, and if you're lucky, maybe they return the first stage back to Cape Canaveral, and you can see that falling back, coming back down to land. So it's not just the launch that you can see down there anymore. You'll see the first stage rockets coming back down to Earth because SpaceX is reusing those. It's really cool. You ought to do that.
So maybe Mr. K will join me. We'll fly to Florida just for a couple of hours to go and see a rocket launch.
I'll be in Chicago too, so.
Will you be there?
I will be there also, so yeah. So
awesome. So maybe we'll have a big rocket launch party. Don, you could fly there too.
Yeah, I'm going to be in Chicago the week after next. Maybe not the 27th of June. Maybe a little before. I don't have my calendar handy, but we'll see.
I'm going to be in Chicago from the 18th, actually.
Oh, so early, yeah.
I'm there from the 18th through the 21st in Chicago.
Hey, so maybe I'll see you there.
Okay.
We'll chat. Oh, that is brilliant. We can go out. In fact, we must talk because I've got an idea. But are there any more questions from the kids from Mr. McNulty's group or from Ms. R's group? I'm sure
Who had some questions?
A couple of hands.
Who had some questions? And he's up. You're next, okay? And then you're up. Come on up, Logan.
Okay, so we'll do 2 questions from Mr. McNulty, and then we'll do a couple more from Amy, and then we're done. All right.
You're introduce yourself. Be nice and loud.
Cameras. Take a picture too before we hang up.
Yo, first take.
Okay, I think we're ready here. Can we ask?
Okay, yep, sure.
Go ahead.
My name is Logan Russell, and I was wondering, is it cold in space? Like, I know it's cold, but like, do you know how accurate it is?
Yeah, Logan, in the sunlight in space, it's like 250 degrees. It's very hot in the sunlight of space. And then at nighttime, when the sun sets, when you're going around the Earth, the temperature drops to about -200 there. Even on the moon, if you're standing on the moon like Neil Armstrong was doing in the sunlight, it's about 250 degrees there. And then at nighttime on the moon, the temperature drops as well. So the exact temperature, you know, it's somewhere between plus 250 and minus 200 as you orbit the Earth. And as you know, you're transitioning from daylight to nighttime, the temperatures are changing pretty quickly for you. It's a tough environment up there.
Wow.
Okay,
So,
great question.
we have some other questions. Who's next? You want to come on up? Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jamie. When you have free time, what did you do?
Okay, on the space shuttle missions, they were 2 weeks long, and we didn't have a lot of free time. But typically, what you do is go to the window and just watch the Earth. And what I like doing, once during a 16-day mission, NASA would give us what they would call a half a day off. A half a day off for NASA was only 4 hours. I don't know how that's a half a day, but they would give me 4 hours totally free, nothing scheduled for me. So I would go to the window, just float in front of the window there, and I would put on some headphones and listen to Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, as I would go around the Earth from sunrise to sunset. And it was just so spectacular to watch, many sunrises and sunsets in a row like that, listening to some great music.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
Okay.
And we have one more question.
One more question. Okay.
Hi, my name's Noelle. If you couldn't be an astronaut, what job would you have wanted?
Okay, Noelle, I had thought about some other careers. When I was very young, I wanted to be a professional football player. I was too small for that. That didn't work out. But if I wasn't an astronaut, I would have been an engineer working on the space shuttle program. That's actually how I started working at NASA. So I still would have been involved with the space program. But something else that I was interested in growing up was archaeology and anthropology. I got a minor in college. I majored in physics, one of the sciences, but my minor was in archaeology and anthropology. And I've always loved fossil hunting and doing that kind of exploration. So if I couldn't have been an astronaut, or if I could come back in another life, maybe I would do something like that.
Thank you.
Interesting. Okay, and then we go back to Mrs. R's group. You just have to unmute yourself.
Okay, Josh.
How did you feel when you discovered that you're going to space?
Oh, good question.
When I discovered I was going into space and how they notify you, they give you a call. So I'd been training for maybe 3 years already, or maybe 2.5 years. And the chief of the astronaut office, the head astronaut, he gave me a call and he said, hey, we just assigned you to a mission. You're going to fly on Space Shuttle Columbia in about 1.5 years. And I was very cool and calm. And I hung up the phone, and then I was just screaming afterwards because I knew my time was coming. It was a really exciting moment. So most astronauts, when they learn they're going to fly on board a mission, they're just jumping up and down, yelling and screaming because it's great news always.
That's exciting. Is it okay if we turn our backs to you for 1 second just so we can take a group picture with you?
Go for it.
Sure.
So let's just face me.
Are you going to trust me that I don't put horns on anybody's head there? You can never trust an astronaut, huh?
No, you can't. I've heard stories.
Jackson, I can't see you. And I'd like everybody looking at the camera. I can't see Avery. Let's all do a thumbs up. That's great. Thank you. And one more. Okay, and then I'll move to the right, Jackson. We're just going to do one more. Thank you. Okay, ready? You have it, Yoko? Okay. Okay, let's turn back around.
Oh, and you guys, are you doing thumbs up too in Mr. McNulty's group? Thumbs up, we get a photo. There we go. Awesome, awesome. All right, so we've unfortunately run out of time because, as you know, Dr. Thomas is quite a busy guy and he's rushing out all over the place, and hopefully we're going to bump into each other in Chicago and maybe even Washington. But I just want to end off by saying that for all the students in the class, what Dr. Thomas did not mention is that he did apply to be an astronaut, and unfortunately, he was turned down. And maybe if you could just end off by telling that story, because there's a very important lesson to be learned from that. So you want to just tell them a little bit about that situation?
Yeah, sure. Well, I told you I wanted to be an astronaut since I was like 6 years old. So I always worked hard in school, always tried to do my best. After college, I took a job down in New Jersey, in Princeton, New Jersey, and I started applying to NASA to become an astronaut. And NASA selects new astronauts every 3 or 4 years. They'll pick a small group of 10, 15, or 20, depending on their needs. And 2 years after I got out of college, NASA put out that announcement. They looked for new astronauts. I was all excited. I wrote to them. I got an application form, filled it out, sent it in, and they turned me down. They said, no, thanks. 2 years later, there was another astronaut selection. I got another application form, filled it out, mailed it in, and guess what happened that time? They said, no, thank you. We don't want you. And at this point, I realized I'm not even getting close in the competition. And I knew I needed to do more to get noticed by NASA. So I started taking flying lessons. I learned to skydive. I taught a university course. I was just trying to improve my background to make myself a better candidate. 3 years later, another astronaut selection. I sent my application in. And that time, I made the group of 100 semifinalists. NASA brought me to the Johnson Space Center. I underwent that series of medical tests and an interview. But in the end, that third time, even though it was very close, I did not get selected. And I just about gave up on this dream of mine, but I really wanted to do it. So I decided I'm going to move down to Houston, Texas. I'm going to get a job as an engineer at NASA, just get closer to the action. And I did that. So I worked as an engineer on the space shuttle program for 3 years. And then for the fourth astronaut selection, I sent my application in. I made the group of 100 semifinalists and got selected that time. So the number one lesson I've learned in my life is to never give up. You all have dreams. All of our students today have dreams of what you want to do in the future. And if you're willing to work hard and don't give up on that dream, you can accomplish anything you want to in your lifetime. I'm kind of living proof of that.
Thank you for that story.
Isn't that awesome?
Steve, is it okay? The picture didn't come out. I'm really sorry. Can we just quickly take one more?
Sure.
And then okay.
Okay. And I've been taking photos too. I'll send them to you now as well. Okay,
great. It's just that Don Thomas ended up not being in the background of the one we took. So let's just
Oh, well, we need Don Thomas in the background. That's very important.
Okay, let's all do it. Smile. Wait, let's wait for Don Thomas. You know what, Don, can you say something so you're the big picture on the screen?
Okay.
Otherwise, even though, okay, that's good. That's
tested.
Good.
1, 2, 3. We're all smiling here, and if we go 3, 2, 1, and everybody says the word pepperoni, then everybody will be smiling. 3, 2, 1. Pepperoni. That'll do it every time.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you so much. And that was an interesting last story.
Yeah, my story. It's not unique.
Just one thing I want to add. If I can just add one thing before you tell them about your story. Don does hold a record with regards to pepperoni. Do you want to tell them what that record is?
The first human, the first person to take pizza up to space. Do you know who that person is?
You.
It's me right here. I took a pepperoni pizza on my third and fourth mission up there, and I'm the first person to take pizza in space. So I'm famous in life because I was a member of the Woodpecker crew, and I'm also very famous because I flew the first pepperoni pizza in space.
2 interesting facts. Okay, we're going to have to get going, but thank you, all of you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for those great questions.